and welcome to the Brookside online service. We're so glad that you're joining us today. And if you're new, we would love to be able to connect with you. So if you could fill out a Connect card on our website, that will give us a way to be in touch with you and help answer any questions that you may have. We also have prayer cards online that we would love to receive any prayer requests that you may have. We'll be praying for you and following up on those as well. Also, we have some fun upcoming ways to connect with others at Brookside campus in ways that work with social distancing, including the camp out, which is happening at Smithville Lake. So check out the website to sign up for that fun weekend. Also, women's Bible studies will be starting soon. So the website can give you the info on all of those studies. We have a variety of options available to fit your preference. So right now, we just invite you to take a breath and get ready to worship together wherever you are. And we just thank you for joining us and being a family together.
Alone in my sorrow and dead in my sin, lost without hope, no place to begin. Your love made a way to let mercy come in. When death was arrested and my life began, the ash was redeemed, only beauty remains. And my orphan heart was given a name. My mourning grew quiet, my feet rose to dance. When death was arrested and my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new, now life begins with you. Released from my chains, I'm a prisoner no more. Shame was a ransom he faithfully bore. He canceled my debt and he called me his friend. When death was arrested and my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over. Darkness rejoiced as though heaven had lost. But then Jesus arose with our freedom in hand. That's when death was arrested and my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over.
Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never fail me yet. I know the night won't last. Your word will come to pass. My heart will sing your praise again. Oh, Jesus, you're still enough. Keep me within your love. My heart will sing your praise again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never fail me yet. I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way, and I believe I'll see you do it again. See you move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way, and I believe I'll see you do it again. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never
Therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is good, pleasing, and perfect will of God.
Well, she was one of the most beautiful girls that I had ever seen. We were both in middle school, and at that time, I was one of the more round kids in our school. So talking to attractive girls was kind of a big deal for me. And it just so happened that on the way back from one of our field trips to the local gas station, which, yes, is a thing in Sterling, Kansas, I just so happened to end up walking next to her. And we struck up a little bit of a conversation, and after a while, towards the end of that conversation, she actually ended up asking me a question. She was like, "So, Taylor, I was wondering, would you want to go to youth group with me?" Now, I had grown up in church basically my whole life, but I'd never really been to a youth group before. I mean, our town literally had 7 churches and 0 youth groups until this one showed up in town. And so I didn't really know what to expect, but like I said, I was round. So basically, this was kind of a date for me. But I soon learned what we all learn at some point in life. Cute girls fade, Jesus lasts. It's just a fundamental truth to reality. Because soon, the girl disappeared from the scene pretty quickly, but I had found my home, I'd found my family, I'd found my deepest friendships, my best memories, and I tangibly encountered the love of Jesus in youth group. And my life was forever changed. As God's Spirit moved in my life, I saw myself transforming at a rapid rate. Over the next 7 or 8 years in my life, my growth seemed natural and somewhat inevitable. But after a while, as I got into college, I noticed something shift. Change seemed harder. Over the next 7 or 8 years, the fruit of my relationship with Jesus was much more difficult to see. I felt in many ways like I was becoming slowly more stagnant. And what's crazy to me as I look back is that all that time I was growing more than I ever had in my knowledge of the Bible, in my understanding of theology and of the church, and more. Like I felt like I was being fed so much in my understanding of my faith, but it wasn't always translating to making me look more like Jesus. I still had the same sin, I still had the same habits, and I still saw little change. Have any of you ever had a similar experience? Like maybe the first few years of your faith were full of change and growth, but at some point it started to level out and maybe even decline a bit. And sure, you still knew what you believed. Maybe you wouldn't say that your belief in God or His existence wavered at that point in time. But you found yourself asking questions like this. Is this all there is? Isn't there supposed to be more to this following Jesus thing? If I have God's Spirit and I believe that I do, why does change seem so hard? And it's this tension that is one of the reasons that we're taking the next few weeks to go through this series called We Can Change. And the basic idea of this series goes like this. The gospel expects transformation. If we follow Jesus, if we're indwelt with His Spirit, change should happen. And not only right away, but throughout the rest of our lives, we're supposed to be fundamentally renovated to be more like Jesus. But many of us have had experiences like mine that I just shared that have led us to believe that that kind of change might not really be possible. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to ask the question, how do we change? Or maybe even a better question is, how does God change our lives? And to do that, we're going to stay in Romans 12, verses 1 and 2, where Pastor Bill led us last week. And just a reminder that these verses were written by the Apostle Paul, who's someone who experienced powerful transformation that we can read about in Acts chapter 9. But here's what he says in these 2 verses in Romans. He says, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God." And last week, Pastor Bill, in these same verses, showed us that trying to change through our willpower or through trying harder is ineffective at best, that we need something more. And what he showed us was that only being loved, only receiving the tender mercy of God gives us the power to change. Only being loved can change us. And we have that loving connection with God. It begins changing us. And that's an important starting place, because what it helps us see, and what we often miss, is that God is already at work. God is already at work. You are not the one initiating the change in your life. God is already changing you by loving you. And that should be freeing. That should be a freeing truth. But what that truth shouldn't do, and what it often does, is make us complacent or passive in the transformation process. Which is why I think Paul moves so quickly from the reality of God's love and His tender mercy to the urgency of our response. He says that experiencing this mercy should compel us to respond in a certain way. And that way is something that he calls worship. And he'll go on to say in these verses that as we respond in worship, we will be transformed. We'll become like the one who we worship. Here's how philosopher James K.A. Smith puts it in his book, You Are What You Love. He says worship is the arena in which God recalibrates our hearts, reforms our desires, and rehabituates our loves. Worship isn't just something we do, it's where God does something to us. Worship is the heart of discipleship because it is the gymnasium in which God retrains our hearts. The gymnasium in which God retrains our hearts. And this worship isn't just any worship for Paul. It's worship that he says looks like a living sacrifice. And for Paul, that language means a total, all-out devotion to God with everything that we are and everything that we have. A living sacrifice of daily and slowly dying to ourselves. So the idea that we end up getting from Romans 12, particularly as it relates to change, goes like this. God uses every part of us to change us. God uses every part of us to change us. And he specifically names, if you were paying attention, two parts that God uses to change us through our worship. And that's our bodies and our minds. In other words, in order to change, we must devote our whole body and mind to loving God in worship. Those are two key things that God uses to change us. So first, let's look at the idea that God uses our bodies to change us. God uses our bodies to change us. Now, many of us have a hard time seeing our bodies as something that God actually cares about. Like, often it feels like my body's more in the way than integral to becoming like Jesus. And it's reinforced because we grew up hearing songs like I'll Fly Away that make us think the Christian life is all about escaping our bodies one day. Like that's the goal, is just to escape our bodies and float around in heaven. But that isn't the picture of the body that we get in Scripture. In fact, across the pages of God's story, it's hard to avoid the truth that our bodies are actually good. Like God didn't make a mistake when He gave you a body. In fact, bodies were God's idea from the start. He made us, created us with bodies for a reason. And even more true is the fact that Jesus had a body. He came down in a body. He lived in a body. He died bodily, and He rose in a body, which means that He currently still has a body. And in another letter to the Corinthians, Paul says that we too are going to rise in a new kind of body at the resurrection. We'll be in bodies forever. So I'll Fly Away is a good song, but bad theology. God, our bodies matter to God. So what does this mean for change? It means that our bodies are actually important for our transformation. Our bodies are important for our transformation. What we do with our bodies matters because it forms and shapes us, either for good or for bad. And that's why Paul says here, present your bodies as a living sacrifice in verse 1. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Here's how scholar Michael Bird explains Paul's meaning here. He says, worship that is living, holy, and pleasing to God, worship that makes God smile, does not take place on some spiritual plane, but occurs through what we do with our physical bodies. Now, we'll talk a little bit about what that could look like. For now, we need to understand this, that if our bodies are necessary for change, many of us are trying to change in deficient ways. Because if you're like me, what you try to do when you try to change is outthink your body. Like if I can just get enough information, if I can just read enough to find the right strategy or life hack, if I consciously think about changing and learn all there is to know, change my perspective, then I can override my body and then God can change me. I do this all the time with my eating habits. I'll just come out and confess that I am an all-out believer in the paleo diet. Like I've looked at the research and the studies behind the nutrition. I know what foods are good for me and what foods are bad for me. But as much as I know and even believe in the power of this diet, and as much as I've even seen it effective in my life, that knowledge and experience itself doesn't change me. Like just knowing those things doesn't add better nutrients to my life. It doesn't help me lose weight or get active or anything like that. In fact, I can be, and I have been at one point, listening to a podcast about nutrition and have that stuff in my head, but as soon as I pass a Taco Bell, a stronger and deeper and more ingrained habit called the 5-layer burrito pulls me away. See, we can't outthink or escape our bodies. What we do with our bodies matters when it comes to formation. We're either using our bodies in a way that is forming us to be like Jesus, or in a way that is forming us to be what Paul calls conformed to this world. God uses every part of us to change us. So if we're going to change, we need to worship and love God with our bodies. So after urging the Roman church to present their bodies before God as a living, holy, pleasing sacrifice, Paul then calls them to be transformed by the renewing of their minds. So not only does God use our bodies to change us, He also uses our minds to change us. Both present your bodies and renew your minds. Which leads us to believe that our bodies and minds were actually intended to work together. I know we often experience them competing with one another, like my mind wants to be healthy, but my body wants a 5-layer burrito, but they were meant to work together. In fact, our minds are technically part of our bodies. It's what we call the brain. And this is another area where our typical efforts at change are a little bit deficient. Because I've become convinced more and more recently and convicted that many of us are loving and worshiping God with half of our brains. We're neglecting the half of our brains that where change and character formation actually happen. Last week, Bill touched on this a little bit when he introduced us to the idea of the left brain and the right brain. And the left brain, it's easy to remember, is the more logical part of our brain. Think left, logical. It's the part of our brain that's involved in conscious thought. It's where we deliberate on ideas. It's where we solve problems. It's where we assent to truth that we believe, other things like that. And it's such an important part of our cognitive function. We couldn't do without the left side of our brain. But my guess is, when you think of mind, that's all you think of. That was true for me until recently. And that's mainly because in our Western cultures, especially since the Enlightenment, we've overemphasized these left brain functions to the neglect of the other half of our brain. And that half of our brain, the right brain, you think right relational. It's the relational side of our brain. And this side of our brain is a bit more instinctual. It processes experiences before the left brain even has time to consciously think about them. Yes, well, how does that work? Let me give you an example of what that might look like. See, when I was a kid, I used to love staying at my grandparents' house. And I loved so much about being there and hanging out there, except for one thing. And that was the metal parrot in my grandparents' rec room. For some reason, I just had this fear that this inanimate parrot would somehow come alive and attack me as I was in that room. Now, when I was laying in bed, just kind of out of the equation, just thinking about it, I would be like, nah, inanimate parrots do not become real parrots. That's not something that happens. But when I had to go in there late at night and to get something, my right brain got there quicker than my conscious thoughts and said, danger, parrot attack, abort mission. And then I would run back to my room. Maybe you've had this experience happen with that pile of clothes in your room that looks like a person, or running up the basement stairs as fast as you can because it's dark and you think someone's behind you, even though you know that that's probably not true. And it's this kind of phenomenon that's the reason that neurobiologists call the right side of the brain the fast track and the left side of the brain the slow track. The slow track is what you say you believe. The fast track is what you functionally believe in the moment. The slow track can only consciously focus on one thing at a time, but the fast track is subconsciously synthesizing multiple experiences at once. That's how those two sides of the brain work. Now, why are we going into all of this? It's not just because I want to give you a lesson on the brain, but it's because the best brain science tells us that the right side of our brain, the relational side of our brain, is where character formation happens. And that just happens to be the side that we have grossly neglected and underutilized in the Western church. And I've become more convinced over the past few months that one of the reasons we have such a hard time seeing change in our lives is that we're trying to help something grow in a way that it wasn't designed to grow. We're trying to fix right-brained problems with left-brained solutions. Now, the biblical writers, they didn't have this problem. They were full-brained Christians. Now, they didn't have the language that we have now to describe what happens in the brain, but they also didn't live in a left-brain dominant culture, so it came much more organically. When Paul says things like the renewing of your mind, he doesn't mean that only thinking rightly and getting better disconnected information is what makes us live rightly, which is good because that doesn't match our experience anyway, right? But what we really need is both hemispheres of our brain functioning properly to love God with our whole minds. Because God uses every part of us to change us. And if we're really going to see lasting change in our lives, we need to correct the way that we engage our faith to include our whole minds. Now, when I look back at my faith journey that I shared a little bit of with you earlier, what we've just explored helps me make sense of my initial spike in transformation and my slow drift into stagnation. See, when I look back, at the moments when I was changing rapidly, I can tell that my whole body and my whole brain were heavily involved in how I practiced my faith. But when I was growing spiritually stagnant, I can say the same thing is true. I let loose with my body, and I started isolating the way that I expressed and experienced my faith to merely functions of the left side of my brain. And I became much more disconnected from community and deep relationships as I did that. So what we need then, if you're in a similar boat as me, are habits that help us change in the way that God actually designed us to change. He uses our bodies and our minds to change us. And we'll also see now that He uses our habits to change us. God uses our habits to change us. What we regularly do with our bodies and minds, even now, is changing us, either for the better or for worse. Either to become more like Jesus or more like the world around us. What's true about our spiritual formation is that it's never idle. We're all always being formed by something. And that's why Paul makes a point to say, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. He knows the power of the world to use our bodies and our minds to form us into its image. And that power, honestly, we all know has only strengthened as technology and advertising industries have made a concerted effort to form us. Our phones, for example, are designed to cause dopamine releases in our brain, which facilitate addiction. I mean, how else do you explain the 2 hours of time that you just wasted and didn't even know that you were wasting? Advertising agencies know that our bodies and brains change us too, so they appeal to the physical and the relational and the emotional. It's so easy to be formed. Here's how cultural commentator Mark Sayers describes the ease of conforming to our world. He says, those who wish to influence us need not change our beliefs. That is, the thoughts of our conscious and deliberate slower brain. They need to influence our faster brain, thus controlling our habits and actions. And if this is true, if our habits are forming us in one way or another, then we need to be intentional in loving God with our habits. We can't just sit back and keep doing what we've been doing, because what we keep doing is changing us in some way. Yes, it's true that becoming like Jesus is impossible without the power of the Holy Spirit in our lives. But it's also impossible without our active participation in that transformation process. We need to be intentional about cultivating habits. Now, that doesn't mean that we're earning our salvation. It just means that change is a cooperative effort. It requires us to develop habits that join what the Spirit is doing and deepen our connection to the living God. To use the example from Professor Smith's quotes earlier, to put us in the gymnasium so that he can retrain us. And I've come to see this similar thing be true over the last few months as I've been trying to get better at one of my favorite sports, which is disc golf. Throughout that time, been watching tips from top professionals. I've been going out and throwing more than I ever have before, practicing putts. And throughout that time, what I've learned is this, that getting good at disc golf is hard. Who knew? It's actually hard. And I think that's because there are so many ways to mess up a throw, right? Like you can put the wrong angle on it, you can hold onto it too long or not long enough, you can throw it too hard, you can have bad footwork, no follow through. I mean, talk about something that requires your whole mind and body to be on the same page. And I found out pretty quickly too that it's not enough to just know how to throw a disc correctly. And I discovered it the hard way. One day I had just finished watching a YouTube video with some tips on my throw, and I just felt like I knew exactly what I was supposed to do. And I went out to the course, and first hole, I'm not kidding, I threw it, and it went across the course to the right, like almost straight right, over the fence and into the pool of the YMCA next door. And what this helped me see is that professionals or top-level amateurs, they don't get good at disc golf or ball golf or tennis or music or anything else just by getting more information. The way that they grow is by practicing until the right form and technique are so second nature, until their brains and bodies are on the same page to where it just comes naturally. And friends, that's the goal of the Christian life. Our goal is to become the kind of people who naturally respond to the way that Jesus would without thinking about it. And to become like those people, just like athletes and musicians, we need training and practice off the spot. And habits are the best way that we can do that. So I want to suggest one habit, one that engages the whole body and the whole mind, that can help us embody the love of God today. Excuse me. It's one way that we can regularly put ourselves in the way of God's love so that the Spirit can transform us. So here's what you do. Take some time this week, find a moment to get in a quiet place, to eliminate distractions. And as you're there, think of a memory in your life, whether a few years ago or a long time ago, for which that you are grateful. It can be something big like a wedding or a graduation. It can be something small like sipping coffee on the porch. But when you have that memory in mind, do three things. First, name it. Give it a 2 or 3 word title. So marrying Susan or vanilla latte or beanbag chair. I don't know what it is. But give it a name. And then the second thing to do is relive it. Go back into the memory and really relive it as if you're back in it. Try to feel the same things that you felt and see the same things that you saw. And ask yourself a couple of questions as you do this. First, what did you feel in your body? Was it peace or lightness or joy or hope or excitement? Try to feel that again in your body and what made you so grateful. And then second, ask, what might God be communicating to you through this moment and through what you feel? Take some time as you do this to remember that God is with you and that He likes to share His beauty with you. So take some time to relive it. And then third, repeat it. Find another memory the next day or maybe even just relive the same memory. And over time, try to compile a list of these memories and just spend 5 minutes a day for the next 30 days re-entering these memories and just sitting in gratitude with God. For every memory, it's just important that you feel gratitude in your body and that you feel a connection with God. Now, this and other habits, they're not going to change you in one day, right? That's not how habits work. Or maybe even one month or 1 year. But remember, it's not about trying harder. It's all about consistently presenting your entire body and brain before God. And this is just one way that we can do that. So I encourage you to try, and I'm going to try. Because friends, I don't want to spend another 7 years with a dormant and declining feeling faith. I don't want another 7 years of little noticeable fruit. I don't want another 7 years of keeping Jesus at a distance and relegating my relational God to my logical thought alone. What I want is to know Him and to be known by Him. I want to see lasting transformation in my life. I want to taste and smell and touch and experience His life-changing love. And as I desire this, I'm so encouraged by the reality that when I present every part of myself before God, He uses it to change me. We can change. Let's pray. God, I pray that this week as we seek to develop habits and disciplines that help us embody your love. That we would know that you are with us, and that we would know that you want to change us, and that your Spirit has the power to change us. So God, help us to bring all of ourselves before you so that you can use every part of us to do just that. In the name of your Son, Jesus, I pray, and by the power of his Spirit. Amen. Well, when we come to the Lord's Supper, we remember that Jesus himself came in a body and that he gave his body so that every part of you and every part of me could be renewed. So if you are a follower of Jesus and if you have communion elements and would like to participate in the Lord's Supper, now would be a great time to do so. Just feel free to pause the video and to take as much time as you need to respond and to seek the Lord. So I deliver to you what I also received, that the Lord Jesus on the night that he was betrayed took bread, and after blessing it, he broke it and gave it to them and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And in the same way, after supper, he took the cup. And after blessing it, he gave it to them and said, "Drink of it, all of you. For this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sin. Truly, I tell you, as often as you eat this bread and you drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." Well, as we go now to the places where God has called us as a training ground to work out our salvation and the change we want to see in our lives, would you hear these words of benediction from the Apostle Paul in the book of Philippians? And I invite you to raise your hand as a sign that you are receiving these words of encouragement. It says, "Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to work according to his good purpose." Go with those words in peace and have a great week.